let's start. Integrative medicine. So what's happening out there? What's happening is that we're seeing greater and greater groups organizing. This is the Consortium of Academic Health Centers for Integrative Medicine. This consortium is one of the indicators showing that mainstream medicine is opening up to integrative health. Okay. Now, this has only been in the last decade that this consortium was formed, so only 10 years old. And you can see that, as they say here, they were formed to promote integrative medicine in medical schools. Okay? They realized the importance of teaching integrative medicine in medical schools. And they ballooned from 8 member institutions to 51. And if we look at the list of the institutions that are their members, we see names such as Harvard, Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic. Okay, so, and here in our neck of the woods, we want to look on the Canadian side. Laval University is a member, McMaster, University of Alberta, University of Calgary. Unfortunately, McGill is not on the list, which is an interesting political situation that we have here in Quebec, but that's a whole other topic. But we can see that generally in North America, that this movement has picked up. This is not even necessary in Europe because the Europeans have kept a much more holistic, integrative approach right from the beginning. The medical doctors there are open to working with osteopaths and homeopaths. Many of them have a degree in homeopathy, especially in France and Switzerland and Germany. So it's a very different situation there, but it's been a very particular situation in North America. So this movement is obviously growing and turning around. Now, one of the important studies, and why Harvard got on the bandwagon and is actually promoting integrative health and complementary alternative medicine quite strongly, is that they did a study in the 1990s, and it's called the Eisenberg study. Now, what they discovered then is that there were 33% of Americans using alternative medicine in 1990, and that grew to 42% in 1997. They continued looking into that and realized that today, even though they didn't publish results, that it might be as high as 7%. The Americans, in 1977, the Americans spent more than $27 billion on these therapies, exceeding out-of-pocket spending in all U.S. hospitalizations. Okay, it's a lot of money that people were paying out of their pockets. So this means that these services were not covered by insurance, so people are paying from their pockets to get this help. And in Europe and Australia, obviously they're using higher proportions of the population that use that because they always have. It's always been a part of their culture. Now, what's interesting is that patients' visits to alternative practitioners actually exceeded those to primary care physicians. And what's even more interesting is that they didn't tell their doctors about it. Now, they're very wise not to. They're very wise not to because the doctors don't know anything about it. In North America, this is not part of the curriculum. As a matter of fact, nutrition and diet aren't part of the medical curriculum. They were taken out in the 1950s. So why are you going to talk to your doctor about something that you know he or she knows something about and is just going through? So it's an interesting situation. So what's happening, though, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens to the medical profession here in North America, because they're going to have two schools of thought. They're going to have the old school of everybody who was trained up until a few years ago, who knows nothing about alternative medicine, who thinks it's a bunch of hogwash, who has no background, in nutrition or diet or anything that even can be considered life-sustaining. And you're going to have a new generation that are being trained in integrative medicine. So how that new generation and the old generation work together in the next few years is going to be interesting as well. But at least it's promising, knowing that this new generation is coming up. So we see this kind of research centers as well as training centers in all these major universities. This is the Division for Research and Education in Complementary and Integrative Medical Therapies, funded by Harvard. And we can see the Institute of Medicine here, a quote, The patients do not see complementary and conventional medicine as being mutually exclusive. This pattern will probably continue and may even expand as evidence of effectiveness accumulates. Okay, so why? Now, what do you think their reasoning could be? Because we're looking at a group of people who have been sort of working in a vacuum as far as what complementary alternative medicine is. Why would they even consider that? Other than, of course, the financial reasons, because that's where people are spending their money, obviously. Conventional medicine, I found this quote very interesting. This is from the Continuum Center for Health and Healing. Now, this is the Department of Integrative Medicine. So in all of these universities, they actually have a department devoted to integrative medicine. And this is the Beth Israel Medical Center, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, which is affiliated with Harvard University. I went onto their website and I pulled this quote off their website. They talk about conventional medicine, also called allopathic medicine. And it's sort of interesting because as homeopaths, we always call the fellows who give the chemical prescriptions allopaths. But here at Harvard, they're saying that as well. That conventional medicine is actually just a branch called allopathic. So the conventional medicine that what we call conventional medicine today is one branch. I'll explain that in a couple of minutes, which is really only allopathic. Now, there's many ways of practicing medicine, and this is only one way. It is a little known fact that this way of practicing, what we call conventional medicine today, attained acceptance only in the early 20th century. In other words, the way medical doctors are practicing today is not the way medical doctors were practicing in the last century, and not the way they were practicing at the beginning of the century. Actually, not the way they were practicing up until the 1950s. So the emphasis on emergency care evolved out of a triage model for treating wartime injuries during World War I, as it says here. Thus, with the corresponding concept of battling disease. So this whole idea of killing the germ, battling the disease, the kind of measures that are taken were all developed during the two World Wars. This medical model excelled in surgery, the treatment of trauma, and addressing acute infectious diseases. What we recognize is in World War I, World War II, was the perfect opportunity to develop, and that we see the technological advances in surgery, but then there was also the development, which happened at the same time, of the antibiotics, penicillin, etc. So those two things together, both of which are allopathic measures, is what sort of tipped the scales and created the medicine that we call today conventional medicine, which really works in a very narrow way. So what I wanted to do was just step back a little bit and ask the question, okay, well then what are those three branches of medicine? What was Western medicine before 1950? So before 1950, and as a matter of fact, for the 2,000 years preceding 1950, Western medicine was founded by Hippocrates, the Hippocratic oath that doctors take to do no harm. It was written by Hippocrates. He's known as the father of Western medicine, and he described three branches of medical practice that make medicine complete medicine. His rule was, excuse my Latin, primum non nocere, I don't know if that's Italian or Latin, I said. The best treatment is the one which is the least interfering. Okay, so the whole idea of doing no harm extended to when you treat someone, make sure that you're doing just what is necessary and no more. Do not over-interfere in the organism's natural wisdom. So in his day, and for 2,000 years later, medicine was based, medical practice was based on three pillars. The first and most important was to know how to support the natural bodily processes. The second was how to use what is called similars to stimulate and support the vital force of the organism. which you could almost call as a tonic. And the third was the use of contraries, which stop the body processes and are necessary when something becomes dangerous. So he says those are the three branches of medicine, those are the three methods that medicine must use in order to be a complete medicine. And these are the same principles we see in Chinese medicine and we see in any of the traditional medicines, is that they're based on these three fundamental principles. So supporting the natural bodily processes, what do we see there? This Hippocrates called vis mediatrix natura, how to support the natural processes of the body. Now this is the logical first step that you do anytime there's this sign of symptoms. So, like for myself, I started getting the signs of a cold. I shouldn't be here actually, but the day that I started getting signs of a cold, it's rest, liquids, gentle exercise, making sure that you're rinsing out your body, that you're eating lightly, that you're eating things that are going to strengthen your body without overtaxing it, using hot and cold compresses, keeping yourself warm, putting something warm around your neck so that you can increase the temperature in the neck area if you have a sore throat, so that then the body is more effective in creating the fever and killing the germs in that area. There's so many things that we can do for our body, and those natural supports are of primary importance for any time that we get the initial signs of anything, whether it's a back pain, to whether we're getting headaches more often, whether we're getting indigestion or stomach burning. We have to look at what am I doing in my hygiene, what am I doing in my daily routine that might be upsetting my system, and what can I do in my routine in order to assist my system. Now we would think that that is just common sense, but as far as our medical practice of today goes, it was considered to be a complete unimportance since the 1950s. The 1950s with surgery at the state that it was, and with the discovery of penicillin and antibiotics, the magic bullet had been found. Nobody needed to eat well, exercise, or do anything else. All you did was have to take a pill, and you'd be fine. And that's why we took all of this branch of medicine off medical curriculum, including diet and nutrition and all of these. So that's been off the curriculum in medicine since 1950. Now what's happened, because the doctors aren't practicing that, is that we had the creation of naturopathy. And so the growing numbers of naturopaths who have filled in that void. Because medicine and healing cannot be complete unless people know how to do that. It's still too strong for you, right? The lights? Is that what's on? Yeah? Okay. Let me see if I can do that. Number 8. There we go. Okay. Okay, so that's how naturopathy came about. So what's interesting is now we call naturopathy an alternative medicine. Alternative to what? It's a branch of medicine that was no longer practiced but still needs to be. If the doctors aren't doing it, then someone has to. So massage, osteopathy, cranial sacral work, anything that works on the body, that's directly on the body in that way and supporting its processes is an important and integral part of medicine, period. Okay, so as I said, what's happened since the 1950s is everything got focused on what Hippocrates called the use of contraries. And people today believe that that is what medicine is. The use of contraries. Now, whether they're herbal or natural or not, there's a way of using herbs and substances in a similar way or in a contrary way. When we use, so in Chinese medicine, for example, in traditional Chinese medicine, we see a lot of herbal use that is used in a similar way. It can also be used in a contrary. What is the difference between the two? We're going to talk about similars in a second. In a contrary way is the way that we're most used to, is to go opposite to what the body is doing. So if you have diarrhea, you're going to take something to stop it. If you have constipation, you're going to take something to go, right? In other words, whatever you have, you're going to take something that's going to do the opposite. Now when we do that, we're going against the body's natural process. Now, one of the first things when you have a microorganism is for your body to detox itself and to try to eliminate, and very often that causes an irritation in the bowel and some diarrhea. And the diarrhea might be a necessary part of the process. Now, what if that diarrhea occurs in a very small baby? And if it's prolonged, we know that it could be very dangerous for the life of the baby. In that case, you would use a contrary. But in the first sign of diarrhea for yourself, the first thing that you should be doing is seeing what's happening to your body and what you need to do. You know what that is. Let me put it here. Something's making noise. What you need to do in order to support your body, in order to support that natural process. So, but contraries then come in, according to Hippocrates, only when the natural way of supporting your body and the similars, the tonics, fail, okay, are not enough in order to promote a healing process, and that the body, in its striving to create a healing process, is actually destroying itself. If I were to ask you the question, what produces the fever when you get sick? Is it the microbe or your body?
Body.
Huh? Is it the microbe that produces the fever, or is it your body that produces the fever?
It's my body.
It's your body that produces the fever. So in the old days, if you got a fever, what did we do? Does anybody remember what their grandparents would do? We'd wrap you up, we'd make you a nice hot toddy, right, with hot water and lemon and maybe a little bit of rum. If you're Irish, a little bit too much rum, a little bit of lemon, right? And we'd get you so that, oh, you're hot, we're making you even hotter. In other words, we would bring the fever to a point, and then it would break, and then you would be completely healed and cured. Today, we give you an aspirin. And we have a difficulty today in fighting anything off because our systems, right from the onset as babies, are, rather than being supported in their processes, are discouraged in their processes. So our bodies have not, in this generation, not even been given the opportunity to learn how to get over even the smallest microbe or cold. So the overuse of contraries goes against the body and against the body's processes, and over a long term, and we've only been doing this a couple of decades, but we already see the effects of it. Over the long term, actually debilitates our bodies. So we don't see it in the first generation where they were brought up the old way and had to fight their way through their diseases. But this new generation, we're seeing such an astronomical rise in asthma, childhood diseases, and the inability to fight off disease or even the simplest cold without it going into bronchitis or other complications. And this comes from the overuse of contraries, the misuse of contraries. So what we have to understand is that contraries are fantastic in a life or death situation. There is nothing better than that. Thank God we have them. They are a miracle drug in all of those situations. But to use contraries when we have chronic disease, when we have the onset of a small disease, when we have the first sign of a symptom, is a misuse of contraries. So we're just putting medicine into context and saying, so what we've done, and we've all sort of been brainwashed now into saying, this is the only way we can practice medicine. Now the doctors, the medical doctors, because it's not part of their training, only know this way. And so an answer they'll often give to someone who has chronic disease is, there's nothing we can do for you. And they're right. There is nothing that allopathy can do for them. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing that medicine can do. And this is the confusion that's happening in our minds today when we have such a very narrow practice of medicine. So this is allopathy, which we now call conventional medicine, but which is really only one branch, and which is lopsided. So now we can understand why Harvard, Mayo Clinic, UCLA, and all of these medical universities are talking about integrative medicine, because they're realizing that there are pieces missing to the healthcare system. There are pieces missing, important pillars missing to what we call complete medicine. The use of similars now. So that's the third part. And of course, this is what homeopathy is based on. So homeopathy is not naturopathy. They're two very different things. Even though most homeopaths will be well educated in naturopathy because the two complement each other very well, and both complement allopathy. The use of similars has a specific target, and that is to stimulate the vital force, but on a very individual basis. So we can say generically, if you get a cold, drink more liquids, chicken soup, stay in bed, warm, all of those things, and that suits everybody. But do we all feel the same way when we get a cold? Some people, you might have noticed, when they get a runny nose, it gets all red under their, you notice that? Some people get all excoriated and it burns. But just the smallest amount of mucus on their upper lip will cause a very big red rash. Another person will feel that with the tears. Other people have a completely bland mucus, and others have yellow colored, others will have greenish colored, others will... So everybody, yes, everybody has a cold, but what is individual, or what differentiates your experience of a cold and my experience of a cold? Mentally, emotionally, and physically. Some people get sick and we call them, they're easy patients, and other people, like, you don't even dare enter their room, right? So we also have a very different mental and emotional state when we're sick. And it's those individual signs that the law of similars and the use of similars is based on. Now this is hard for our culture as well, because again, the one size fits all, you go out, you get the one thing that everybody, I got a cold, give me something for my cold. Well, in homeopathy, you can't do that. You've got a cold? Okay. Tell me what you experience your cold as. How are you feeling mentally? How are you feeling emotionally? What's happening with that mucus? Is it burning? Is it bland? What color is it? We have like 50 questions to ask you. Because what we're going to give you is not something for a cold, it's something for your particular body. For your individual and unique expression. So that we have over, by the way, we have over 5,000 remedies. Okay? So it's extremely individualized. That's also what makes homeopathy the challenge. You can ask our students about it a little bit later. That's the challenge, is knowing all of those remedies. We have systems, though, we have our ways. But that it is so individualized. Why? So that we really give you what you need, what your organism needs, in order to stimulate your personal response. So it is a personalized tonic for you. Now what's beautiful about that personalized tonic is that when we have what we call a constitutional remedy, that remedy is useful for anything you get. Whether you get a cold, bronchitis, a rash, the lumps, a swelling, because it doesn't treat the pathology, it treats you. It is your tonic. So most times, once we found a constitutional remedy, that is all the individual needs, is just to take a dose of that again. Which reminds me, I didn't take mine. Right? They say the shoemaker, anyway, to take that, and that is what stimulates your process, the best. Now what's also interesting with the use of homeopathy is that even if contraries are used, so let's say it got very life-threatening, or there was some things that started happening in your system that were very dangerous, and you ended up taking antibiotics for whatever reason, we can still use homeopathy while you're taking the antibiotics, because there is no contraindication. The homeopathy works on such a deep level, it works so individually, that it doesn't contraindicate whatever they give to you chemically or biochemically. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. But basically, for you to know that the homeopathy can be used with naturopathy or allopathy, there's no contraindications because it works on such a much more deeper, more fundamental level of the individual. And it can be used consecutively with allopathy, but also after. In other words, let's say after you've had a treatment, it helps the treatment, you know, an antibiotic kills the cells, but it also kills the bacteria in your colon. It also upsets your body. Any kind of allopathic intervention is going to have side effects, right? Because it's imposing something and going against the body's natural process. So in order to fully heal, very often homeopathic can bring you right back to your old self, or even better self than you were before. Okay? So that's what's now called homeopathy, or what has been called homeopathy for the last 200 years. Okay, so just an overview. Now we can, the two first steps and important pillars of any kind of healing challenge are supporting the body's natural processes in natural ways, and the use of similars, your tonic, in order to strengthen your vital force so that your organism can do what it needs to do and also learn to do what it needs to do, okay, as far as maintaining its own homeostasis or creating a new homeostasis after an infection or any kind of challenge. And then there's the use of contraries, okay, which again, as far as we're concerned, is not a contradiction to our way of practicing. Homeopaths all over the world, except here in Quebec, work side by side with medical doctors. The over 350 homeopathic hospitals in India have surgeons and are medical doctors themselves that are homeopaths. They work side by side. They work right in the operation room with the surgeons. The same thing in England, the same thing in South America, in hospitals all over the world. Here, it's as if there's a wall there, but in which we're hoping with education, with this new wave of education and the new trend for integrative medicine, that our current doctors open the door for that. Because we certainly love to work with the allopaths. We have enough of a basic training in allopathy to be able to understand pathology, to be able to talk their language, and we can work together because the two complement each other and there are no contraindications. So, since homeopathy works with all allopathic processes and allopathic treatment, we can certainly work with them. And we can also improve the results of allopathic treatment because we can both prepare the body before the treatment and also treat the body after the treatment so that the secondary effects from medication are eliminated. So allopathy would even work better if it was working with us. And we know that allopathy works better if we take care of our bodies too. We're learning that. We learned that the hard way. The magic bullet thing is going out the window a little bit. Okay, so how does it work? Yes? Let's go step by step. And for you first to understand what homeopathy is. Okay? All right. Okay, so the first thing to understand is that it operates, what did I say? Is there a remedy for a cold? No, but just answer my question, just to make sure you heard me. Is there such thing as a remedy for a cold in homeopathy? No, it'd be for that one person. It's individualized. When you say clinical trial, by definition, a clinical trial is one size fits all, right? Let's see how that's, no, but, right? So just so that you made sure that you understood that, you know, so there's going to be some precepts that we...
I just don't get why is it not accepted in Canada?
How much what?
Why is it not accepted in here? Why doctors don't believe it?
Well, we'll look at that as well. The percentage of the gross national product in Quebec, the industry that has the greatest percentage of the GNP in Quebec is the pharmaceutical industry in Quebec. We see a direct relationship between the percentage of the GNP of the pharmaceutical industry and the practice of homeopathy. It's like if you go worldwide, you'll see that statistic almost everywhere. So that's just one, but a very important factor. Okay, but we'll go into the other reasons as well. Huh? Okay. So how does it work? We have a single remedy, which is the central pillar and focus of the globalized and individualized treatment. Okay, so that single global, what we call global because it works on the whole individual, is the pillar of the treatment. we know that when we've addressed that we've addressed the disturbance, whatever disturbance was in the individual that caused the susceptibility. You have to be susceptible to something before you catch it. There's always a susceptibility in the constitution of the individual that precedes any disease or any expression of disease. My cell phone. It's very embarrassing being the speaker, right? Okay. All right. Can you hear me? Oops. Something happened there? I'll turn this off too. Hello, hello. Okay. Can you hear me? Technology is great when it works. Okay. So the single global remedy is what sustains the individual, is what helps the entire, the person as a whole, in other words, the entire organism. And that's what's interesting about homeopathy, is that it addresses the organism as a whole, which is why it's, I think, why we're saying that it's the medicine of the third millennium, because it is the only medicine, the only branch of the three medicines that addresses the individual as a whole. So that single global remedy addresses the individual as a whole, and then we can look at the processes of elimination, nutrition, also stress reduction, exercise and breathing as the other pillars to sustain the individual in their healing process. So basically, with these three, we have what we can call a complete medicine. Supporting the body processes, supporting the vital force, and the use of allopathy makes for a complete, or what we can call a truly integrative medicine. So the point being, of course, that Western medicine was always an integrative medicine. It has only not been an integrative medicine for the last 50 years. So the current trend to move towards integrative medicine is not something new. It's just a return to our senses. So it's an important thing to realize. And so that we may, whatever resistance that people might have to what seems to be a new age idea or something that's just come up in the last while is out of context. That it's actually been historically the basis of and foundation of medicine. So the last 50 years, the battlefield medicine, which we said has sort of a survival response, part of that survival response also means applying protocol. So when you see this situation, this is what you do. In an emergency, you don't want people don't have the time to think. They don't have the time to solve a problem or to consider. You have to have clear protocols. Okay, when you see this, do this. When you do this, do this. Okay, so protocol is an absolute and necessary part of any kind of battlefield response, any kind of emergency response or survival response. Where a protocol is inappropriate is in a chronic disease. You can take 20 people who have rheumatoid arthritis, and if you ask them about what their experience of their disease is, you'll get 20 different answers. For some people it's burning. For some people they can't form a fist. For other people it feels as if it's twisting. For other, they're going to have a different sensation, a different experience. They're going to have different times of day that it's worse. Some people it's worse in the morning, others it's worse at night, others it's worse with the cold, others with the damp, others in the heat. So all of those variations mean that there's, on an individual level, there's a different individual response. So to apply a protocol would not make sense in homeopathy. And only makes sense, again, in an acute emergency situation but does not make sense in a chronic situation, because what are you applying the protocol for? The expression of some symptoms? In which case, all you're doing is addressing the symptoms and not the cause of the symptoms. So what ends up really being a chemical suppression when allopathy is misused, again, not when it's, I'm not talking about all the great things that allopathy does, we all know about that, but only when it's misused, is that we have secondary side effects. We end up with drug dependence. Okay, a cure is not taking a pill every day. If you have to take a pill every day, you are not cured. You're reliant on that drug. And also what we see is developing more and more cell resistance to different kinds of medication and metabolic complications. In other words, once you're on one pill for a number of years, then you find that you need something to counterbalance the effects that it's happening on your digestion, or your inability to assimilate your food properly, or so you end up, in many cases, and we can see that with our aging population, on many different prescriptions. Okay, so that's what the problem is, and that's what all of these universities, these medical universities, are looking at as a problem. They realize that it is problematic. Okay, it's not, allopathy isn't the full solution, it's not the cure. Now what's interesting is Dr. Hahnemann, who is the founder of homeopathy, who actually coined the word homeopathy. He also coined the word allopath, by the way, in allopathy, knew that 200 years ago. Okay, he was already seeing, even 200 years ago, where the tendency was to go towards protocol. The tendency was just to address the symptoms or the pathology rather than understand what was happening in the individual. And so he wrote this saying, protracted, repeated doses of strong medicine, whose long-lasting and not infrequently terrible effects they do not know. I mean, that's what we're discovering today, is we're realizing the long-term effects. We thought taking the pill, the birth control pill, was everybody's solution. But taking the birth control pill for more than 10 years puts you in grave and serious risk of developing cancers and other problems. So he was able to know that at his time because he understood the fundamentals of medicine. He also said they suppress the allopathic drugs, suppress and cloak the disease ailments through opposition, because you're going against it and you're suppressing the expression of the symptoms, but you're leaving the basis and actually strengthening the basis of the disease itself. And this is why so many prescriptions end up in so many other prescriptions very often, is because the disease process is still there, the imbalance is still there, and it's just going to move in. So if you suppress it being expressed in one way, it's just going to move into another kind of expression. So this was his preface, actually, to a book that he wrote called The Organon of Medical Art. I think it's a fascinating read. Not everybody might agree. But what is interesting is that it's a compendium of his whole life, well, how he got through medical school in the 1700s was by, he worked his way through medical school by translating the Greek and Latin ancient texts of medicine, and actually began to study himself. What was his question, I guess, so he was hired by the University of Leipzig to translate these texts into German. And as he did that, he learned about ancient diseases, he learned about the evolution of disease, he learned about ancient methods of addressing disease, about the whole of medicine, about what was even in ancient Greece, a practice of allopathy, of homeopathy, of using very microdoses. And so from that understanding of how disease evolves, how disease and what is true cure versus suppression, he wrote The Organon of Medical Art, and which was the foundation of the use of homeopathy. He realized that without homeopathy, without the use of similars, that medical practice would not be fully sustainable. That cure requires, in very many cases, a full cure requires the use of similars, the use of that tonic that addresses the whole individual. So, if we look at back at the pharmaceuticals, and the reasons why. We talked about the influence of pharmaceuticals. In the US, $300 billion in prescriptions represented a 61% increase from 2000 to 2010. The average price of prescriptions also more than doubled, from 30 to 68. Retail sales of prescription drugs up 250%. That's so from 72 billion to 250 billion. This is a little excerpt from the University of Toronto. People are questioning the integrity of government, the motives of politicians, the expert knowledge of medicine, and the accuracy of testing for pharmaceutical drugs. This is what's leading to the question of that. We see this again in the academic medicine, AAMC. Pharmaceutical sales representatives do not provide potential prescribers with a comprehensive overview of available evidence and treatment options. Rather, they tend to give us a biased view. So it was interesting. A couple of years ago, I was invited by McGill medical faculty to talk to the graduates of medicine. And during that talk, I asked the question, I said, how many studies do you see from independent labs? In other words, from labs that are not pharmaceutically based. The director of the department got up and said, I can answer that question. None. Our students only see pharmaceutically based studies. Interesting. And after they graduate, well, after they graduate, most are dependent on the pharmaceutical industry for continued education. So the continued education of doctors is provided by the pharmaceuticals, usually in almost hard to turn down circumstances, you know, who's for your family, and we teach you about everything that's new and drugged. So all doctors have to have a certain number of hours of continuing education, and the pharmaceuticals make sure that they get all, if not the lion's share, of that continuing education as well. So why don't our doctors know about anything else? Because they're not taught anything else. The influence of pharmaceuticals, as it says here, is overpowering what can be called objective medicine at this point. So it's hard to have an unbiased view. So all of those things are what contribute then to this one-sided view of medicine. So now we're in a new era. We're understanding the need for integrative medicine. We're understanding the need for individualized treatment. The one-size-fits-all doesn't fit everyone. And also the need for new medical models. I'm going back to Harvard. No longer satisfied with one-size-fits-all approaches, over the course of the last 20 years, people have sought a new level of quality and caring in healthcare. So what is this quality and caring that people are seeking? As early as 1977, George Engel is talking about a new paradigm, a new model. We have not always had a biochemical, mechanical model of the body. And certainly Western medicine is one of the few traditional medicines that has that model. If we go to Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine, let's take Chinese medicine because most people know about acupuncture. Acupuncture works. It's shown to work. Yet it is not and cannot be explained in the current medical model. Acupuncture has proven to work for over 2,000, probably actually more like 5,000 years of human history. People know and studies show that it works, but nobody is able to explain it in the biochemical terms of our current model. So just because we can't explain it doesn't mean that it works. The people on the forefront, on the front lines of healthcare, when we talk about giving quality care, who is it that takes the brunt of that? It's the nurses, right? How long do you see the doctor when you're at the hospital versus how long do you see the nurse, right? There's no comparison. Right? The nurses are on the front line. They know about the complications. They know about the side effects. They know about patient suffering more intimately and more directly than doctors do. So the doctors have the theory, but the nurses are in the front lines, having to practice and having to cope with whatever is coming out of it. So it's interesting to see the movement as well in holistic nursing. Holistic nursing is a movement that began way before the integrative medicine movement that we see in the medical colleges. The nurses were the first to call the alarm and to say we have to expand our view and we have to change our paradigm. That this way of seeing people as a chemical machine, okay, isn't enough. That human caring, human cure, human healing requires a lot more than seeing ourselves as chemical vats or machines. So this is a little quote from the Continuing Center for Health and Healing. Conventional biomedical science is based on Newtonian physics, which describes how matter acts and reacts in time and space. In other words, how stuff works. But the accepted science of modern physics reveals that all matter in the universe, including ourselves and our bodies, is made of energy. And that energy is primary over matter. So holistic nurses treat the totality of a person as a feeling, conscious energy system connected to a universal energy field. Now you would have thought that I wrote that. When I read it, I said, geez, I could have said that. But no, these are the nurses who've written that, is, over a decade ago. Actually, in the early even in the 1980s, the holistic nursing movement began. Nurses started changing their paradigms then, realizing that the Newtonian physical paradigm, that Newtonian physics is too limited a view. So we talked about the quantum paradigm last time. I'm just going to talk about a few things just so that everybody's on the same page. What do they mean by a field? When these nurses are talking about a field, they're talking about something that quantum physicists have discovered, and quantum biologists are discovering to play a more and more important role in all biological processes, okay, which is what we call an energetic field that organizes the physical body. So there's a fluid, energetic, organizational field within every organism, as well as what we can call the bioorganism of life on Earth. This energetic level of organization corresponds to a field reality. Now, only quantum physics has this field reality, on which quantum physics is based, of course. And this, since the quantum physicists have brought this idea of field reality, we have, as homeopaths, feel finally vindicated in being able to explain what Hahnemann was talking about 200 years ago, but had very few words to describe what it meant. Because when he was asked to describe how homeopathy worked, he used two examples, electromagnetic field and the gravitational field. He says, it's like that. That's as much as I can tell you. It's like that. It's not chemical. It's not mechanical. It's like that. And everybody said, what is he talking about? The dynamic action of medicines is a super sensible idea, far from the material, the mechanical. It is dynamic, virtual. So finally, it's not around to see it, 150 years later, quantum physicists propose exactly that kind of harmonious one wholeness, because when we talk about integrative, we also talk about holism and holistic medicine. And what does that mean? Holistic medicine means that the disease process goes beyond just one individual. The disease process is also something that exists in a field. And we can see that in medicine. Any kind of disease has trends. Because all of us arise from that seamless whole. We are all expressions of a whole movement, as the quantum physicists described and shown in their experiments. Now what's interesting is the Newtonian view. Newton, when he did his work in the 1700s, what did he have at hand? An apple, a tree, a couple of balls, okay? He had things that were on his order of magnitude that he could manipulate and observe. So he based his laws of physics on what was on his order of magnitude as far as speed, observation, and what he could see was happening. So it makes perfect sense that that Newtonian view works very well when we talk about mechanics and things that we can manipulate ourselves and speeds that we sort of can go ourselves. Where Newtonian physics started falling flat was when we tried to explain anything else. And what we're finding is that in all areas of research, that this simple mechanical chemical view on a Newtonian thing, in other words, one ball hits another ball, it bounces off, and this happens, works, but only in the context of a very small order of magnitude, only in a very slice of what is reality. Now that we have detectors and lasers, and we have machines that can look into our electromagnetic fields, we see that there's a whole world, our world, that is inexplicable, that is not explained by Newtonian view. And this is what these holistic nurses were pointing out. The Newtonian view doesn't work for biological processes. As a matter of fact, it doesn't work for anything smaller than a ping pong ball, bigger than a truck. So what's interesting is that in these low speeds and short distances, in other words, on the human dimension, Newtonian physics seems to work. The quantum theory, though, is needed to explain anything else, especially intracellular processes. So this is an example of an intracellular process that happens billions of times every minute in your body, is cell division. We've known about mitosis ever since the microscope, for over 100 years. But we've never been able to explain the perfection by which mitosis occurs. And we know that that perfection is of utmost importance, because 1,000th of 1,000% error and you'd be dead within an hour. If your cells didn't reproduce and divide so quick, so exactly each time they did that process, our bodies would very quickly fall apart. So now I'd like for you to take a look, okay, just for those that weren't here the last time, at what a field, so when Hahnemann was saying what homeopathy works like is just like an electromagnetic field. Here, I've got a magnet, let me show you. I'll take this magnet and I'll put it under a plate of glass and I'll put iron filings on top. And you see what happens? You see those iron filings, and this is what he talks about in the Organon. He says those iron filings line up in exactly this pattern every single time, perfectly, in perfect alignment. It's infallible. The processes that are directed by a field have this infallibility and perfection that nothing mechanical can come close to. Notice the shape of the spindles. Notice how the centromeres are lining up. Notice the lines. Huh? The spindle says they're going in. Huh? Those exact same lines are the exact same pattern as an electromagnet. So what he stipulated at his time, he says, underneath those chemical, mechanical reactions that we see in our body is an underlying field. There's something much more subtle that is invisible to the eye, but is much more vital. And that's what orchestrates cell division. But what we're also finding out orchestrates photosynthesis. There's a number of research articles, and we talked about them last time, and I gave you all a list for those of you who came last time, of ultra-fast quantum dynamics in both photosynthesis and metabolism. In other words, metabolism and photosynthesis, the very basis of life. We wouldn't be here without photosynthesis, and we wouldn't be here without metabolism. Life cannot exist without those two processes. Those are the fundamental processes of life. That those two processes can only be explained using quantum mechanics. They cannot be explained using Newtonian. So to say that we can base medicine, which is treating a biological living organism using a physics and a model that works for ping pong balls, okay, we're bound to eventually to have a problem. we need to bring that model into the quantum age. And so current research shows that nutrition, reproduction, survival, even evolution, particularly even nerve transmission and even the sense of smell, can only be explained using quantum processes. We know Newtonian physics well enough and we know our chemistry well enough to be able to explain it if we could. Using those we can, but we can't. We have to use the quantum understanding in order to explain these processes fully. So a field. The quantum processes, so what we thought was a world of stuff and solid stuff is actually a very dynamic, fluid, flowing field, organizational field, both universally and also individually. So the field, the definition of physics of the field, is something that is beyond the physical and becomes observable only through the behavior of an object under its influence. Okay, so you cannot measure a field directly, and that's why it's evaded us. Is that it cannot be measured, and ask any physicist, he says, no, you can't measure the gravitational field. It's impossible to measure the gravitational field. The only way we can measure the gravitational field is by taking an object and dropping it into the field. And we see then, by its acceleration and its movement, how strong the gravitational field is. But we can't measure it directly. We cannot measure it directly. It is suprasensible. It is metaphysical, if you want. It is beyond the physical dimensions. Okay? We can only measure its effects. So I'm talking pure physics now. Those of you who were here last time heard all about this in great detail. What was interesting is look at the language that Hahnemann used 200 years ago, way before quantum physics, way before we knew anything about fields or could even explain anything electromagnetic. We were still working with our balls at that time. He says the life principle is a power evasive, invisible in itself, and only discernible by its effects on the organism. In other words, you can't measure the biological field, just as you can't measure the gravitational field. It cannot be directly measured, but you can measure it through the effects on the organism. So, if you have a medicine, oops, before I cause another action, if you have a medicine that can only work on something that is suprasensible, in other words, only on that level of the field, okay, how can you tell if it's working? Can you measure it's working? You can only tell it's working by its effect on the organism. So how do we do this scientifically? Because Hahnemann was probably one of the most stringent and perhaps one of the founders of the scientific method. Before his time, the scientific method wasn't a very strong thing. He saw the importance of the scientific method. He says, if we're going to base a science, if we're going to base a branch of medicine, then it shouldn't be based on theory and ideas. We don't want people just fabulating on what a homeopathic medicine will do. We need scientific evidence. So how do we do this? The only way we can do this is by taking a homeopathic substance, giving it to 50 of my best medical doctors, not telling them what it is. Okay, so the word double-blind didn't even exist in his time. Nobody was doing double-blind tests in the time of Hahnemann. Nobody. Okay, they didn't even know what that was. But he said, it's better that they don't know what it is. So they don't know what it is, but they're going to take that medicine in a repeated way until they start feeling effects on their organism. And especially effects on their organism that they have never felt before. Because those effects are going to be due to the homeopathic medicine they're taking, obviously. Especially if, over a period of time of them taking the medicine, we gather up all of the evidence. In other words, we gather up all of the mental, emotional, and physical changes that are happening in their body, and we see what is happening to all of them, generally. Then we'll have an idea of what the effect of the homeopathic remedy is. So that is what's called a homeopathic proving. And that is the scientific basis. And we'll go into that a little bit more later. So basically, just to finish with the organon and what Hahnemann was saying, he's saying allopathy presupposes nothing but material causes. How many people have heard that? Well, your tests show you're fine. And there you are. Yes, but I can't get up. I keep throwing up. I have this rash. I'm sick. Yes, but if I don't have a material cause, I can't do anything. Of course, in allopathy, that's the only time it should be used, is when there really is a material cause, when they can detect it and they can see it, then it's the appropriate time. But if they don't see a material cause, then it's a misuse of allopathy anyway. Now, if there's a difference, though, in saying that because there's a material cause, I can't treat it, and saying if there's no material cause that I can see, then you're not sick. You see the difference? So your symptoms can still be very real, even though there is no material evidence. But as he said, if the allopath presupposes only or nothing but material causes, then he's excluding a much more subtle level of disturbance. And that's the level that homeopathy can address. Because homeopathy addresses those dynamic distunaments, in other words, the changes that happen on the level of the dynamic field of the biofield. So coming back to the relativity theory and quantum physics, what's interesting is that if we input human order of, if we take the quantum, or let's say the relativistic equations or quantum equations, and we take those equations and we put in 6 feet, 30 miles an hour, whatever time lag it would take us to do that, those quantum equations reduce to the Newtonian ones. Does everybody follow me on that? So in other words, if you take the quantum equations and you put orders of magnitude of the human dimension into them, that reduces to the Newtonian. What we're saying is that relativity doesn't deny a Newtonian reality. So we're not, those holistic nurses are not saying, throw out everything you know, we have something better. They're not saying that at all, and nor are homeopaths saying that. And nor are quantum physicists saying that to mechanical engineers, right? Because you're a quantum physicist, you're not going to say to a mechanical engineer, what you're doing is false because it's based on Newtonian physics. No, it works for engineering. The engineer works on a human dimension, and it works when we're using cement and rocks and making bridges and driving cars, okay? It's just that your physics doesn't work on the intracellular level. Your physics doesn't work to explain astronomy. Your physics doesn't work to explain what's happening on an subatomic level. But it works for bridges. But you know what? If I take all of your information to construct that bridge, and I put it into my quantum formula, guess what? I get the same results you do. Okay? So relativity, quantum physics, does not deny or contradict Newtonian. Okay? It just provides a bigger picture that goes beyond Newtonian. And this is what people have to realize, is that when we talk about field biology and quantum biology, it doesn't deny what we know biochemically. It simply goes to a different dimension. It goes beyond it. It's both more subtle, but also more broad. So holism and homeopathy don't deny the chemical-mechanical model. It's still very useful, and especially when there are physical signs and reasons to see the physical basis of disease. But what we do have to recognize is that those views are an expanded view of what we already know. And that expanded view is becoming more and more necessary as research goes, and as medicine. reaches its practical limits using the mechanical medical model, and now has to go to something bigger. So these holistic nurses understood 20 years ago, 30 years ago, this is where we have to focus. We're not denying what we already know. We're not denying the foundation of everything that we've learned. We're just building on it. We're going beyond it. Huh? But it's still there. Does everybody see that? So it's an important thing to understand that there is no contradiction between quantum physics and material physics, just as there's no contradiction between holism and homeopathy and allopathy. Okay? One is just a subset of the other. So homeopathy targets that internal attunement, right? What is a precursor to illness way before it shows on the charts, way before it shows in the blood. Of course, if we treat somebody before they have any signs of anything that shows in the blood, then we can never prove that we treated them for that, can we? So to say that homeopathy prevents cancer could be true, but how can we prove it? Because you see, this is the conundrum we get into. Huh? What we do have to understand is that energy level is a precursor to all other levels. And what's really interesting and what's been discovered by homeopathy is that we actually have a means to be able to detect that. What we have to understand as well is homeopathy doesn't work on a part or an organ or a chemical or one particular chemical reaction. As a matter of fact, the danger of allopathy is when they don't realize that something they're giving you, which they think only works on your rash, actually had, or as we thought, for example, antidepressants only work on the serotonin levels and what happens in your brain, but actually those antidepressants have also an effect on the way we digest our food and the way our colon, sorry, I'm all blocked up today, the way the colon operates. So that people who are on antidepressants are not absorbing their minerals and nutrients and vitamins as effectively because those antidepressants are having an effect on other chemicals in their body. So when we, even though allopathy may think that some of the drugs are dedicated to one particular function, because our bodies are so much more infinitely complex than we even know, they're often having side effects on all other parts of the metabolism. Homeopathy works on a more subtle level, but it also works globally. In other words, by design, it works on the whole organism and not just a part. So when we give you something, it's for your complete system in the way your system is organized. It doesn't work on your liver. It doesn't work just on your pancreas or just on your throat. It works on the whole underlying organizational field of your body. So it's a whole different mindset. It's a whole different way of understanding the organism as well. You can't come to a homeopathic understanding of an individual through the person's parts, through how their liver is versus how their pancreas is. So as interesting as blood samples may be, and we certainly use them as an indication of the person's well-being and health as far as markers, that's not how we're going to come to a homeopathic remedy. We have to come to that remedy in understanding how the organism is orchestrated. In other words, what is fundamental to that organism as a whole. We often talk about holism, and people in the same breath will say mental, emotional, physical. So a holistic view is one that looks at the physical part, and then we'll send you a psychologist to look at your mental, emotional part, and and that's a holistic process. Well, those are looking at parts, and you can't come to the whole through the parts. And those aren't my words, words of Plato. They're also the words of the fellow who coined the word holism in 1924-29, Mr. Smits. No, Christian Smits? It was Christian Smits. He says, addressing something greater than the mere sum or intersection. when we look at the whole, that global state or that deep energetic level, it's not the sum of the parts, and it's not even where they intersect. It really is something that goes beyond the whole. In other words, it goes to a level that contains all those levels, but is the precursor to all those levels. The successful prescription is based on the most profound and global experience of the individual. So that you have a sharp pain on the left side of your body may be interesting and may be part of the prescription. But we need to know what you feel as an individual as a whole. There are certain experiences that you have. When you say, I feel beat up, or I feel sore, or I feel, you know when you're really overtired and you have that soreness that is global, okay? Those experiences that you have that are global experiences are the ones that are most important to us. Because that's the global sensation, and that's what's going to bring us to what underlies all of the other aspects and expressions. So what's been interesting in homeopathy is because we've been doing provings, because we've been doing this science for over 200 years, we have an incredible compendium of information. Now we're talking about 200 years of medically formed doctors, the doctors, you know, MDs, who do these provings on themselves. Medical doctors are typically very healthy individuals. They have to be because they're exposed to all sorts of diseases all the time. So it's one of the criteria, I think, to be a good medical doctor is to have, and they have used themselves for 200 years to do these provings in order to understand the dynamics of each one of the remedies that we use. To understand that global state, to understand, okay, what is underneath all the mental and emotional and physical symptoms that I have. So let's just look into that scientific method for a moment. What is the kind of information then that a medical doctor taking a homeopathic remedy, of course he doesn't know what he's taking, is going to look for? He's going to look for pains and physical sensations. He is also going to look for changes in appetite. So that's a strange thing that happens. You ever notice when you're sick, how what you sometimes, you know, you really like that lemon meringue pie when you're well, but when you're sick it turns you off? That when our energy field, when the organizing, or that global state is affected, it affects all parts of us. And if we pay close attention to our appetite, to our desires, to things that we are averse to, some people who are very chilly, for example, you know, and like to be warm all the time, they get sick and all of a sudden they're throwing off the bed covers. So the things that we desire and aversion, that are averse to can change under the influence of a homeopathic remedy, as well as when we're sick. Sensory changes as well. Taste in the mouth, but also how things taste. You know, sometimes you're sick and, oh, everything tastes sour, or everything tastes metallic. That is very particular to the state that you're in that moment. And that state is beyond a biochemical reaction. There's something deeper than that that is causing that to arise. So hearing, sensibility, sight, chilliness, warmth, emotions and feelings. So what the homeopathic doctors experience as well as they're taking the remedies is they realized that they were expressing different emotions. That all of a sudden they were very sad, or that they were more easily angered, or that they felt depressed, or there were other changes that were happening. They also noticed that they would react differently to environmental changes, things that they never reacted to. You know, the cold never bothered me, or the humidity never bothered me, but while I was taking this homeopathic remedy, it started to bother me. My body perspiration changed. I usually only sweat under my armpits, but my whole body was perspiring, or the other way around. My sleep patterns changed, and even I had a different kind of dream. So this is, you cannot explain this chemically. This is a whole organism shift and change, where your personality, and how many people tell us when we're sick, you're really not yourself. We do go under personality changes. We go through emotional changes, also changes in taste, and all of these. Because something is happening globally. not just in one area of the body. Okay, so that is what the law of similars is based on, is that those changes that happen during proving over the last 200 years have been mapped out, and then when we understand an individual as a whole, we go back into that materia medica, back into that information, we see the whole picture of the individual, and we're able to match the individual to the appropriate remedy out of the 5,000 remedies. Thank God for computers. So the materia medica is that compendium of information felt by provers, physically, mentally, emotionally, and has given us and provided us with perhaps the most broadest and extensive library and information of holistic medicine that exists in the world today. So for 200 years, homeopaths have been looking at co-relationships between physical and mental symptoms. This is something that scientific research has only, if we call conventional research, has only been looking at in the last few years. So what's the MICH program? So the challenge for the MICH homeopath, right, is to discern that. Is what is that deepest, most global level possible in an individual. Our MICH homeopath has to understand disease as a dynamic field disturbance, as a healing process, which is, and the healing process which is as individual as the expression of the disease. So the way you're sick is very individual and pertinent to you, but also the way you're going to get better is also individualized. And we have to understand that everybody's healing process is going to be different. Some people are faster, some people are slower, some people go through different series of healing processes. All of that is individual as well. The homeopath, the MICH homeopath, also has to perceive the individual as a whole through a special process. It's not through the blood tests, it's not through chemical analysis. But we do follow a proven scientific method to get that information, but also to treat. And what we find, and what's so fabulous about homeopathy, is that when we do treat someone homeopathically, not only are the physical symptoms treated, but we see a change on the mental, emotional, and even deeper levels of the individual. The meaning of life, their attachment to life, changes in their relationships, changes in the relationship with themselves. People come back and say, well, not only is my rash gone, but you know, I've been getting along much better with my wife. We've worked things out. We were close to divorce before I had that woman. We get that kind of feedback all the time. Anyway, today, you can have the opportunity to talk to somebody with a badge. They're either a student or a student intern or a graduate, and they can tell you about their personal experiences. So, much more than medicine, the training here is a transpersonal transformation. What you learn is how to meet an individual as an individual, is how to really listen. And I know a lot of us think we know how to listen, and I'm sure that almost all of our students, when they enroll to the program and we ask them, do you know how to listen, they all say yes. And now they're all laughing, because 2 or 3 years later they go, I didn't know how to listen. I thought I did. But what I learned was a whole other dimension of listening. I learned to listen to another individual as if I'm hearing them for the first time. I'm learning to listen to another individual as if they are unique in the world. Because they are. But how many of us are able to listen to the uniqueness of the other person? How many of us are able to hear what is truly different in each individual? How many of us are able to meet another individual without bringing all of our baggage of our past and our ideas and our prejudices and our previous experiences of them and our emotional reactions and everything else? So to be able to really listen is a fundamental requirement of practicing homeopathy. But because of that fundamental requirement, it has reverberations into our personal lives, into our relationships, into our way of living, our way of speaking, our way of understanding each other, and our way of understanding humanity and the challenges that are facing humanity now. So I wish I could tell you this is an academic study and all you have to do is learn a bunch of stuff, but it isn't. The academic part of homeopathy is probably the easiest part. And I think our students would agree. The hardest part is the transpersonal transformation that you go through when you can take the program. It changes you as an individual. It changes your way of seeing life, and it changes your way of relating. But what's beautiful is because that's what the training is about, and because that's what the medicine is about, that the effects of that medicine are also transformational. So I hesitate even to talk about that, because it's such a personal experience that you almost have to either experience it yourself or know someone who's experienced it in order to be able to understand how deep the transformation can be after you take a homeopathic therapy. So we're going to be putting more and more testimonials on our website that you can take a look at, but there's also going to be ways for you to understand. Now I know you're probably saying, so how do you do that exactly? So what do you listen for? Would you like to know? How do we do it? What is the trick? So what's the process we use to find the remedy? Come to our next It's going to be in February, and that's when I'll be able to explain to you exactly what the process is and how it works in detail. That's a whole explanation of its own. In the meantime, however, I would really encourage you, if you have any interest in this at all, to come and try our method. Okay? We have our interns at the MICH Training Center. For a full $105, you get 4 sessions over 6 months of an hour each, or an hour and a half each. So that's for $105. So that's like $20 a pop. And you're going to learn so much about yourself. You're going to learn about a level of yourself that you don't even know exists. And after a session, what we get universally from anybody who comes to a homeopathic session with us is that they leave and they go, I had so many insights. I learned so much about myself. And then they'll call us and send us emails later saying, guess what? Now I understand why this happens, and now I understand, and then I saw this and I saw that. So there's that whole, it's a level that that there is really no other method existing. It goes way beyond psychology. It's not about analyzing yourself at all. As a matter of fact, it's about leaving analysis behind. We do not meet. I think maybe I just touched on what is the hardest thing for us to learn in homeopathy, especially at MICH, is that it is a process that doesn't involve thought. And for a lot of people, that's inconceivable. As a matter of fact, they can't even think about it. Because how can we conceive of a process that doesn't involve thought? We think about everything. We meet everything in life with thought. We think about everything. We think about our relationships. As a matter of fact, we're thinking when we shouldn't be. We're thinking when we should be just listening to our child express what our child is. We're thinking when all we need to do is give a hug. We're thinking way too much. As a matter of fact, that's one of our diseases. So one of the prerequisites to doing a good homeopathic session is not to think, is actually to be in a completely open, meditative state, to be able to totally receive the individual. And when you've been heard by someone who's not analyzing you, who's not thinking of their laundry list, who's not thinking of what time it is and when you go, who's not thinking, but actually just listening. When you've had that experience, you'll want it again and again. You'll know that you've touched something that you have nowhere else in your life. Because even in psychology, there's thought involved. There's analysis involved. There's putting you in a box. We don't put people in boxes. We don't have categories that we put you in. We know that every single individual is totally unique and totally different. And we know from the time you walk into our office that we know nothing about you. Because we've never met you. How could we? And by knowing that we know nothing about you, we have to sit there and we have to learn from you what you're about. Because only you can tell me. Because only you know. You've lived in your body for as many years as you've lived in your body, right? Huh? Well, I want to hear that. So it's very often people will say, it's the complete opposite of going to the doctor. The doctor doesn't want to hear what you're just wants to see your blood results. Don't tell me what you're feeling, And we're the exact opposite. We want to know what your experience is on the deepest level possible. So you're being received on the deepest level possible. So it's insightful, mind expanding, experience expanding, very often transformational. And our interns, this is our library and our little discussion corner. The interns work hard researching your cases. So if you go, you've got a whole bunch of people that are going to be working on it. I can't think of a better deal than that for $105 to get all those people focused on you and finding exactly where you're at. And if you're too shy to do that, then certainly try a session with our MICH graduates. They also have badges and are walking around. But it's worthwhile for you to try it and experience it before you come to the next talk. And if you know people who are interested in the method or finding out about the method, tell them as well to try to experience it first. That way when they come to the next talk, they'll have a sense of what I'm talking about in an experiential way. Because it's something that does go beyond words. Because it goes beyond thought, it goes beyond words. Now that doesn't mean that thought and academia doesn't have a role, of course. Once the case is taken, once we come to that understanding of who you are, without any preconceived ideas, without any prejudices or judgments, once we really understand who you are, then we have to take that information back and do our homework. Go into all of those books, go into all of that materia medica, and then find out what is the remedy that's going to match. What is the state? How can we best describe the state? But only after it's been understood. So that's the MICH method. There's more about that on our website. And for those of you who like to have the scientific data on homeopathy, I'm going to be presenting a lot of that as well. Whoops. No, I didn't want to go anywhere. Come back. Got connected to the internet there. Must have clicked on the wrong thing. The success of homeopathy. I have a couple of references. I'll give you a couple of references now. I'll talk a lot more about this later. One of the arguments for homeopathy is that it's a placebo. Well, someone's going to have to tell me how a placebo works on 2.5 million people during an epidemic in order for it to be a placebo. We have studies, and this is an incredible study that was done in Cuba. They had a very serious problem with leptospirosis that would kill between, it was 5 to 30%, according to their statistics. And they actually ran out of the regular vaccine and had to use, and someone, we know who, it's Homeopathes Sans Frontières, it's Martin Gould, who's a medical doctor and who used to run our homeopathic association, who established a number of homeopathic clinics in Cuba, who suggested that they use homeopathy. So they did, on 2.5 million people. Now these were medical doctors who conducted this research, who knew nothing about homeopathy, but had no choice. And they said, well, we have no choice right now, we have nothing else to give them, so we'll give them the homeopathy. And they were astonished. They were astonished by the results. They were so astonished by the results. So astonished by the dramatic decline in mortality. Not only the dramatic decline in mortality, but the complete eradication of leptospirosis in Cuba. That they changed the Finley Institute, which used to be a pharmaceutical manufacturer, into a homeopathic manufacturer. It was one of the successes. Of course, we can talk about many other epidemics through the history of homeopathy, and you have a little handout on that. Everything from typhus to cholera to yellow fever, diphtheria and influenza. So can homeopathy act on disease, physical disease? Yes. Is it placebo? I don't think so. Studies show that homeopathic treatment is at least as effective as written in controlled trials, where we're trying to address autism spectrum disorder. But others show that maybe some of the strongest evidence also comes from veterinary medicine. In Germany, they had, the decision was to go bio, to go organic, and so they did not want to be using antibiotics and vaccines. And they turned to homeopathy, with incredible successes there as well. So if homeopathy works for babies in epidemics and for animals, then I think it's got to be a little bit more than a suggestion in the color of the pill. So the placebo argument falls flat when we look at the real studies. How easy is it to publish these studies? Almost impossible. For the reasons that we've looked at before. We cannot make money doing homeopathy. It is impossible to make money doing homeopathy. You can make a remedy yourself. It's impossible to patent it. It's impossible to own it, which is great for countries like Cuba and the Third World. And this is where we're seeing homeopathy being embraced the most, is where the pharmaceuticals do not have such an influence, and where very often they can't afford the high cost of pharmaceuticals. And so more and more are using homeopathy, and there's a number of initiatives, we can talk, which I'm going to talk about next time, that are proving very successful in a number of cases all over the world using homeopathy. So it's a grassroots movement. And I guess as homeopaths and at MICH, we're trained to follow the mystery, as Einstein said. And what we find most interesting is what can't be explained necessarily by our own paradigm, but which works and which is proven to work, and which we experience with our own eyes and our own personal bodies to work. Anyway, for those of you interested in the program, the acceptation process has begun. We're going to start the interviews in January, so January 2012, for next September. So we have another class, we're planning to start another class in September 2012. We do not start a class every year. The next one may be in 2016. Why am I saying maybe? Because I think my team and I have been working so hard that we may want to take a sabbatical. So we'll see. But the earliest it could be is 2016. But we are looking forward to a new group and a new movement in homeopathy. Okay. So I thank you very much for your